welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Welcome to part 2 of my review of 1981's Cult of Terror for RuneQuest 2nd Edition by Chaosium. In part 1 I discussed the cosmology of Glorantha, from the birth of the Celestial Court, through the God's War, the birth of Chaos and the Unholy Trio, and the rise of Wakboth, through to the descent to Hell, the Great Compromise and the birth of Time. Following that, we had the creation of Nysalor, the rise of Arkat, the destruction of Gabaji, and the birth of the Red Goddess. The book continues with the story that takes place throughout the book in a form of sidebars. It follows the reminiscences of Paulus Longveil, the cousin of Chief Halgrim of the Bellini. His story tracks his involvement in Halgrim's war. On his journey, him and his companions have many encounters with the various cults from the book, and the sidebars generally fall alongside the cult as it is encountered. Okay, the first cult up is Primal Chaos. Primal Chaos is the untainted power of random change and the source of all chaos things. You can only be a member of the cult of Primal Chaos via association. The cult has no organisation or structure or temple structures. Indeed, their altars are irregular shapes of mud often. The cult will be led by the most powerful worshippers taking charge. Anybody who is a member of a chaos cult is automatically a lay member of Primal Chaos. The cult has no rune lords, however rune priests of other cults can become priests of Primal Chaos. They have the 3-point rune spell Chaos feature available to them. This spell gives willing recipients a Chaos feature and has a cumulative chance of turning them into a brew. Next up is one of the unholy trio, Malia, Mistress of Disease. Malia grew from the darkness following the God's War and found sustenance among the fallen, becoming a corruption of death. Fearful that her food supply would dry up, she changed her method of feeding by sowing death via plagues and disease. She became the mistress of Ragnaglar and a friend of Thed. Ragnar's children, the Brews, worship Malia, who she aided to help them spread disease. Prayer is brought to her for various reasons, and she is even prayed to by races who do not want their tribes to be infected. Malia's aims are to increase disease in the world, avenge Ragnaglar, and make everyone worship her. The faithful of Malia know that they will not be reincarnated and that an eternity in hell awaits them. The dead of the cult are raised as disease spirits and their dead bodies infected with disease and buried in the earth. Malia is associated with the runes of death and darkness, and were worshipped by the Brew, the Chaos rune. The cult exists primarily as disease is everywhere, and all Brews worship her. Malia is known as the keeper of the cart that carries souls to the sundering stream, and is considered the janitor of the gods as she turns flesh to dust. She is an ally of time, but also schemes for the dispersal of the Great Compromise and the end of time. The worship of Malia is outlawed amongst the major civilizations of Glorantha, with initiates killed and burned as a safeguard. Devoted worshippers of Malia are called Maliants, and they take pleasure from the suffering of others. They hate Shalana Arroy and the healers of Aroyne the most. As a cult, it has little in the way of structure, and most temples act independently. They are usually led by a rune priest known as a disease master. All open wounds and running sores are considered holy places of Malia. All Brew are automatically lay members of the cult from birth, and lay members get protection from specific diseases, although they do have to sacrifice power regularly to do so. Initiates of the cult are usually infected with a disease and call to Malia for aid. The cult has the skills of treat disease, prepare disease potion, spread disease and identify disease. They have a rune spell called Sneeze which does just that. Rune priests need to be adept at the cult skills and ally with a disease spirit. They must strive to constantly spread disease. Priests and initiates get the rune spells Cause Shakes, Cause Brain Fever, Cause Chills, Alter Spirit of Disease, Minor Infection, Cure Brain Fever, Cure Chills, Cure Shakes and Cure Wasting, as well as the powerful Cause Plague. The spirit of reprisal of the cult is usually a powerful disease spirit. We also have some note on infecting plants with disease and infecting small areas. Next we have Bagog, the Scorpion Queen. When Wakboth led his forces to the surface world, many other creatures followed. Bagog was one of these creatures, a dim-witted scorpion daughter of the darkness. Bagog fed in the surface world as she pleased and began to lay eggs. These eggs hatched into smaller versions of her, and while they retained a mostly scorpion form, they were changed by what Bagog had eaten. There were scorpion elves, scorpion baboons, etc. Bagog's children prospered and multiplied and formed a social order around the might of Bagog. The cult feasts upon their dead, thus ensuring an eternal cycle of rebirth. Bagog is associated with the runes of Beast, Darkness, Chaos and Man. The cult is one of survival and hardships. The Scorpion Queen is considered the incarnation of Bagog and her word is law. The cult teaches that knowledge is hidden within others and that devouring them attains that knowledge. The cult hates all law worshippers and particularly hates Stormborn Zarak-Zaran. The people are friendly with the Brews, whom they receive relief from disease from Malia. The cult is tribal, with each tribe being led by their own Scorpion Queen, who is also a high priest of Bagog. Initiates may join the cult by defeating another initiate, usually from another tribe. Rune Lords are usually the head warriors of the tribe and tend to be male. Rune Priests link the Scorpion races to Bagog and wield magical skill and are usually female. The cult has the rune spells Sprout Legs, Jabbers, which turns one of their arms into a long bony spear, venom boosting, claws, carapace, speak to scorpion and ritual of rebirth. The cult is known to partake in ceremonial devouring, which allows the devourer to obtain skills from the devoured. Thed, mother of brews, is next. A member of the unholy trio, Thed was an important goddess prior to the Lesser Darkness. She is the wife of Ragnaglar, and initially her children, the brews, were untouched by chaos. She schemed with Ragnaglar and Malia to bring Wakboth into the world and become its unchallenged rulers. Thed was the mother of the devil, and his malevolence twisted her as she birthed him. After Ragnaglar was slain by Stormbull, Malia left the conspiracy and Thed was defeated and skinned by Kai-Galitor. She is still revered amongst the brews who serve her, and she often visits shamans or rune priests visiting doom upon them. Although Thed was on the losing side of the Gods' War, she is protected by the Great Compromise. Worshippers of Thed become chaos demons after death, who hunt down lost souls. Thed is associated with the runes of spirit and chaos. Thed continues to exist due to the brews' devotion, who worship her as their mother, but is also worshipped by some humans. The cult holds great sway amongst brew tribes. Thed dislikes almost every other god, but reserves a special hatred for Stormbull. She has friendly relations with the cult of Cacodemon and Malia. The cult is structured around a temple, but has little more organisation than that. The most powerful Thed worshipper usually takes control, and they are often known as a Coven Master. Brews can automatically join the cult, but membership is open to any who wish to, although their motivations will be questioned, and all members are expected to answer the call of the Coven Master as an obligation. Initiates need to be vouched for by other members and need to provide gifts for Thed and the Coven Master, such as severed hands of a vanquished fighter or the like. Rune Lords gain an allied spirit from Thed and go through a total rebirth that makes them become a true creature of chaos. Rune Priests are powerful political leaders amongst the brew. They have the rune spells Crack, Fumble, Reverse Chaos, and the horrific Chaos Spawn, which summons a swirling void that deposits a chaos creature. They also have the Rebirth of Chaos spell. Thed is associated with Cacodemon, Malia, and Dakafal, who gave Thed ancestor worship. Next up, we have a chaotic interlude. Here we have quotes from a Lancor Mai priest about the understanding of the word chaos, which is quite interesting as it implies that the word chaotic means that which we do not understand. Following Thed, we have Vivamort, Lord of the Undead. Vivamort began existence as a darkness spirit in hell, set to guard the terrible secret. Vivamort grew curious about what the secret was, and when Ermal crept into hell, Vivamort betrayed his trust to learn the secret, that of death. Vivamort aided Ermal again when he and Humact brought death to the surface world. Being the first to die, Grandfather Mortal came first to Vivamort. Later, when Yelm came to hell, Vivamort was burned and fled to the surface, which was now in darkness. Vivamort sheltered a while with Malia, trading secrets of darkness and death. Vivamort was eventually attacked and wounded by Wakboth. It left a wound that would not heal. Seeing that this wound would utterly destroy him, Vivamort made a pact with Chaos. Wakboth allowed him a hollow, empty existence. He was cut off from the universal flow of power, cast apart from life and death. Vivamort used the great darkness to rip power from harried gods, and he gained allies at this time. News of Vivamort's rise to power eventually reached Hell, and many spirits there cursed him. The sun's curse came into effect. Tychor-Tek, Queen of the Dead, was outraged that Vivamort stole souls that were hers, and she set the earth against him. The river Styx heard of Vivamort's betrayal, and swore he could never cross water again. All the waters of the earth followed Styx's vow. Vivamort is hated and feared by most. His promise of life eternal is as a vampire, a creature willingly removed from the universal cycles. Price is the soul. Vivamort is associated with the runes of chaos, darkness, and death. His cult exists as the vampiric promise of unlife is a tempting one. The cult has some acceptance in the Lunar Empire, but it is detested by most and tends to operate in secret. The cult of the Red Goddess and the Crimson Bat are generally friendly towards Vivamort, whereas the cult of Ermal, Dakafal, Grandfather Mortal, and Humact are sworn enemies. The cult has to operate in secret. The cult has a mysterious organisation. Each temple will have 1 to 5 rune priests or rune lords who run things, and the centre of power is the Plateau of Terror, where Vivamort died and was reborn as the first vampire. Almost anyone can join the cult, but secrecy is expected, and the temple expects regular sacrifices. Vivamort prefers to corrupt the lineage of Grandfather Mortal. Rune Lords are expected to despoil and drain life from the living in Vivamort's name, and are all vampires. As a vampire, they gain all the vampiric vulnerabilities as well as their strengths. Rune Priests exist to further the race of undead, and High Priests have the magic to create a basilisk. The cult has the rune spells of Divination, Create Skeleton, Summon Small Shade, Create Ghost, Create Zombie, Raise Ghoul, and Ecstatic Communion, which is often used to create a vampire. We also have extensive notes on vampires and how the very elements have power against them. Thanatar, the Severed God, is next. Thanatar was born into the world as Tien, whose father was Wakboth. Tien commanded his father's hordes and personally directed the destruction of the god Gennet. Tien continued in his conquest until he was routed by strategy devised by Lancor Mai. Tien hated and sought vengeance against him. He set a trap for Lancor Mai, alluding to knowing the whereabouts of his missing love, the mistress of the light of knowledge. Lancor Mai fell for the trap and walked into Tien's black pit, where he was captured and imprisoned. Tien prepared a ceremony that would drain Lan Mai of all knowledge into himself. Lan Mai, however, found the knowledge to escape. This drove Tien to become obsessed with the destruction of him. Lan Mai, fearing Tien, found protection with the Lightbringers. Then, the spike exploded. As the greater darkness fell, Tien shadowed Wakboth, plotting the downfall of Lan Mai. Tien discovered the mistress of the Light of Knowledge and beheaded her, carrying her head as a foul trophy and extracting her magic and skills. With the death of Wakboth, Tien was unprotected from the wrath of Stormbull and his sons, one of whom, Hrothmir the Horned Hero, pursued Tien to the gates of hell. Tien hid in the underworld away from Yelm's light. Furious, Hrothmir slew himself so that he could pass through the barrier between life and death and enter the underworld. Tien fled into the bowels of hell, but was eventually trapped in between the light of Yelm and Hrothmir's wrath. Hrothmir beheaded Tien, whose head rolled into Yelm's sunlight and had the flesh seared so only a skull remained. Distracted by the shriveled head of the mistress of the Light of Knowledge, Hrothmir failed to notice the still alive body of Tien, who proceeded to dismember Hrothmir and take Hrothmir's head and place it upon Tien's body as its own. The body had been weakened after being separated from its head. It no longer had the powers stolen from the mistress of the Light of Knowledge, nor the ability to devour knowledge from others. By taking Hrothmir's head, it regained some intelligence and some of Hrothmir's abilities. Soon, the head began to decompose, and Tien realised that it needed more heads. It was at this point that Than, a corruption of Tien, was seen wandering about the world with someone else's head balanced upon its shoulders. Tien's horned skull, however, had a different path. Lan Mai, on his quest to hell, discovered the skull and tried to destroy it, but couldn't. But likewise, the skull could not affect Lan Mai, as he had learned to protect himself against Tien's power. To prevent any final vengeance, Lan Mai took the skull with him from hell and cast it into the ocean, which displeased the water gods immensely. Stripped of power, the skull managed to retain its memory and power to consume knowledge, as well as its hatred for Lan Mai. As time came into the world, Than's followers remembered Wakboth's son. His crazed cultists, Thanix, were headhunters who collected the living heads of their victims and drew knowledge and magic from them. When he was severed, Than lost the ability to grant rune magic to his followers, and his followers became mortal enemies of most cults. Many Thanix sought the skull, but as it happened, the skull was discovered on a sandy island by a wandering priest of Lan Mai. Corrupted by the skull, the priest founded the cult of the Horned Skull, who was named Atiar, Devourer of Knowledge. This cult rose in power, status and fear, and constant persecution caused the Atiari to flee the empire. The skull was sealed deep beneath the catacombs in a secret place, and the mutual discovery of the two cults of Than and Atiar formed the worship of Thanatar, the severed god, with worship of both continuing under the control of a Thanatari high priest. This juncture of cults was beneficial to both sides, with each group creating the Consume Mind and create major head spells. Tien was not reunited with his whole self, and the skull of Atiar has many myths and legends surrounding what happened to it. Followers of Thanatar know that they will be put in the place of waiting in hell when they die, and as such they do not fear death. Tien is associated with the runes of death, darkness and chaos, and the rune of truth that was stolen from the mistress of the Light of Knowledge. When decapitated, this rune was lost, as well as most of Tien's control over darkness. Atiar lost the use of death and darkness, but retained chaos and truth. The god Thanatar is a lessened deity with the runes of death, darkness, chaos and truth. The cult has two goals: to regain Tien's power and status, and to gain vengeance on the gods responsible for their current status. Doom priests and doom masters of Thanatar wield great power and influence in the society of chaotic creatures. Cult fears and hates those of Lan Mai and Stormbull, as well as those with similar runes, for example Humak, Ziraxaran and Kai-Galitor. Also, some worshippers are not popular, to the point where Thanatari won't use gold for anything, and will even go out of their way to spit on it whenever they can. Thanatar temples have 3 branches, all presided over by a high priest of dark truths. Below them is the ranking rune lords, or doom lords as they are known. Below that, there are 3 branches within the cult, those of the Hand of Than, the Horn of Atiar and the Breath of Thanatar. Anyone may join the cult of Thanatar, and the cult unsurprisingly teaches the use of the Garrote as a skill. Initiates gain a gift and geese from Thanatar upon joining the cult officially, which vary from good to bad. Rune Lords, or Doom Masters as they are known, take further gifts and geeses from Thanatar. Cult has a number of rune spells, including Create Skeleton, Dark Light, which creates a light that only cultists can see in, Ingest Scroll, Summon Small Shade, and Summon Guardian, which is similar to the Dakafal spell Summon Ancestor. They also have the foul spells Create Minor Head and Create Major Head, which allow them to take heads similar to how Tien took the Mistress of the Light of Knowledge's head. They have Devour Book, Consume Mind, Sever Spirit, and Summon Spirit of Reprisal. The Spirit of Reprisal of the cult has no name, appearing as a shimmering silver skull with ram's horns and glowing eyes floating over a large shrouded humanoid. The Crimson Bat is next up. The Crimson Bat was once a normal natural animal that was mutated by the flood of chaos into the world after the War of the Gods. It is incredibly big and glows with chaotic forces known as the Glow Spot. In order to stay in the world, the bat needs to consume huge amounts of food and power from living creatures. Arkat once met the bat in battle and managed to banish it to another plane. It reappeared again in the Third Age when the Red Goddess appeared in the world after being absent for years, riding the Crimson Bat and routing an enemy force that was besieging the Lunar Empire. Crimson Bat is associated with the runes of chaos and death, and since being bound to the Red Goddess, has the Lunar rune. The cult of the Crimson Bat exists to keep the great beast fed and pacified, and the bat is its own holy place. Rune priests and lords are able to ride upon the bat. Most initiates hope to get to a higher status before they are chosen as food for the bat. Rune lords of the cult are known as feeders, and they facilitate the mundane operations of keeping the bat fed. There are only ever 5 feeders at any one time. Rune priests dedicate all of their time and effort to care for the bat, and the cult teaches a skill called Bat Mastery to assist with this. The cult has a number of rune spells, those which transform the user like Bat Wings and Fangs, and other spells like Power Drain and Glow Spot. The cult is associated with the 7 mothers who granted the spell Mind Blast, and also a Primal Chaos which gives it the Chaos feature spell. The bat must be fed weekly to the sum total of 250 size points of food of creatures with a minimum intelligence of 6, as well as 250 points of power. When the bat enters an area, it creates panic amongst the populace. The bat, being bound by the Red Goddess, must follow the instructions of the High Priest, although if it is not properly fed, it can become uncontrolled and run amok. If it cannot fully feed to satiation, it will eventually vanish from this plane. The bat also exerts an effect called the Glow Spot. This allows lunar magicians within the area to cast spells as if the red moon was full. We then have the stats for the Crimson Bat itself. It is truly a monstrosity of epic proportions. Following this, we have Krasht, the Hungry One. Krasht was created when the gods finally tore the fabric of the world during the Gods' War. Illogical horrors oozed through the tears, and Krasht was one of them. Krasht is also known as the Waiting Mouth, the Hungry One, and the Devouring Mother. During the Great Darkness, Krasht reigned unchallenged for a while, but eventually had to meet Stormbull and his followers. Krasht was seriously wounded in a number of violent battles with Stormbull, who cut off a part of her each time they met. However, by biting Stormbull in battle and tasting his blood, Krasht learned some of his secrets. Eventually, Krasht was driven underground by Stormbull, and Krasht grew her amputated parts into minor versions of herself, Krasht Kids. Tunneling deeper underground, the Krasht Kids made labyrinthine pathways that Stormbull simply could not find a way past. Since time began, Krasht has grown comfortable in her underground domain, and remains mostly uncontested. Krasht has never tried to hold surface kingdoms, preferring to rule below the earth. Cult is associated with the runes of mobility, stasis, and death. The worship of the cult tends to infest civilizations and appeals to the unscrupulous. The cult hates Stormbull and fears Humact. The cult has power bases usually in underground temples, and teaches the battle magic spell TrueNet, as well as the bribery, sense order, brew Pratzim, and hurl Pratzim skills. Pratzim is a foul concoction made from the saliva of Krasht Kids that is cohesive and viscous. The saliva binds and entangles targets that it hits. They also teach the skill Teeth of Krasht, which teaches them to use a special disc weapon that can be thrown into combat and deliver poison effectively. Initiates are known as Lips and move on to become a Drool. Rune Lords are called a Jaw, and Rune Priests are called Tongues, who oversee most important cult business. They also teach the skills Acting, Disguise, and the rune spell Image Creation, defend against Law, Face Law, Chomping, Tongue, Sweat Acid, and Venom Bite. The Spirit of Reprisal appears as a shadowy, palely luminous image of the Mother Mouth. The cult is associated with the Black Fang Brotherhood, who provides the spell's concealment and vision to the cult. Temples of Krasht are built underground by Krasht Kids. The final god we have detailed is Nysalor/Gabaji. Built by the mortal races as a perfect god, the cult of Nysalor seemed to start well and was slowly mistrusted, being eventually known as Gabaji the Deceiver. The priests of Nysalor discovered that they could introduce plagues and diseases into an area and present themselves as healers and help. This caused the popularity of the cult to rise in places like Ralios and Seshnella, where the cult taught that one should embrace chaos. Arkat Humact's son led the cleansing of the land, which took him 3 generations. With their god dead, the cult could not be completely eradicated. The Red Goddess awoke the cult. On her hero quest, she met and was illuminated by Nysalor. With this knowledge, she continued her journey and freed the Crimson Bat, and when she returned, the beliefs of Nysalor became integral to the cult of the Red Goddess. The cult is associated with the runes of Chaos, Light, and Mastery. The cult has little or no power in the world and doesn't particularly like or dislike anybody. Initiates are illuminated by Nysalor's light. To become illuminated, they must answer Nysalor's riddles, bizarre questions with unusual answers. For example, the question could be, what is the difference between a silent movement? With the answer being, the sound of a man dying. The benefits of illumination are multitude. The illuminator can sense illumination, are immune to detect chaos and law skills, immune to detect chaos and law spells, immune to their cult spirit of reprisal, and have the ability to learn Nysalor riddles, and have the secret knowledge that chaos is in itself is neither evil nor inimical. Furthermore, this secret knowledge frees chaotic creatures from their twisted convictions and offers the chance to rid themselves of hate. Here at the end, we discover perhaps the ultimate irony with regard to Arkat. Arkat was illuminated during his youth under the tutelage of the Elves of Brythos, a secret that was known only to the highest of the Arkat cult leaders. The cult of Arkat keeps a strict watch on itself in the world. As Illuminates, they can detect illumination. The cult considers itself the epitome of the light side of Nicelor. This revelation would go some way to explaining how Arkat managed to move between the opposing cults of Humact and Xaraxaran without having to face the spirit of reprisal. Finally, in the appendices, we have the cult compatibility chart, which details relations between the Chaos Gods and other gods, as well as information on spirits of health, new runes, and some further notes on Thanatar. Also, we have a table of the new skills throughout the book, as well as the new battle magic, some information on nets and the new rune spells, as well as a glossary of further Gloranthan material. When I decided to review Cult of Terror, I knew that it would be a challenge. The dense prehistory is at times difficult to wrap your head around, with strange contradictions constantly appearing throughout, which remain until you understand the concept of non-linear time. The prehistory is frankly a work of art, with staggering levels of complexity and metaphysical concepts that are so well explained that there was a certain point where everything clicked and I had a glorious revelation and understanding of God time. The book is frankly fantastic. The cults are all interesting, workable and playable 36 years after being printed. A question I had here was this: why buy Lords of Terror for RuneQuest 3? Upon further digging, I discovered that Lords of Terror fleshes out the cults of Krijalk and Pochango, and the cult of Malian has drastically changed, which would seem to indicate that it is a worthy purchase. Cult of Terror is and remains a classic and an industry standard that many have tried to copy but none have beaten. It never holds back on the horror of chaos, and in the end almost changes your mind with Nicelor's illumination, then hits you with a sucker punch with its revelations of Arkat, his cult and their secret illumination. Chaosium recently announced that this will be reprinted, along with its companion piece Cults of Prax, and this is a great thing for gamers. I can't recommend this book highly enough. If you love RuneQuest, the chances are you already own this. If you don't, you need to own a copy. It can only improve your understanding of Gloranthan cosmology and give you some wonderfully terrifying enemies for your party to face. I have no hesitation in giving this a 10 out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Also, don't forget to check out my other reviews. Bud out.